During the Second World War, Germany rose like a monstrous force in the heart of Europe. A nation that, only a few years after its defeat in the First World War, suddenly became the most feared power in the world. How did they become so strong? How did Germany manage to rise again as a superpower that nearly conquered the whole of Europe? That's what we're going to uncover in this video. If you love stories from the past, real events, not fiction, subscribe to my channel. Here, we open the pages of history together, from ancient civilizations to the fiercest battles of the modern world. One of the main reasons for Germany's power in the Second World War was that they had been preparing for it years before the war even began. After the First World War ended, almost the entire world hoped it would be the last. The leaders of Europe signed peace treaties, established the League of Nations, and prayed that the next generation would never again walk through the hell of war. But while France and Britain cut back on weapons and focused on diplomacy, Nazi Germany had a different plan. A secret plan that did not begin with the first gunfire in 1939, but way back in 1933, with Adolf Hitler's rise to power. At first glance, it seemed Germany was simply rebuilding after collapse, constructing roads, creating jobs, and strengthening the economy. But what most did not realize was that all of this was part of a broader strategy, to prepare the nation for another war. Hitler implemented the Four-Year Plan, a program designed to make Germany self-sufficient in food, fuel, and weapons. Because he knew that in the next war, they could not rely on outside sources. In secret facilities, the production of ammunition, tanks, and aircraft was revived, despite being prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Under fake companies, soldiers were trained. Newly formed units were built in silence. Engineers and scientists were ordered to begin research on weapons not yet seen in any military. While the world slept under the illusion of peace, Germany was awake and preparing. So when they invaded Poland in 1939, that wasn't the beginning. It was the result of years of preparation, deception, and the belief that war was the only solution to the shame of the past. Another reason for Germany's early success was their modern style of warfare. When the Second World War broke out, many countries still looked to the past. They expected the next war to be slow and defensive like the trench warfare of the First World War. But Germany had a different plan. They would not attack just to fight. They would devour, destroy, and move forward before the enemy could respond. This was Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a strategy created to shock the enemy and end the battle as quickly and systematically as possible. Blitzkrieg was not just a regular attack, it was a coordinated assault by three forces: aircraft, tanks, and infantry. First, bombers would destroy communication lines, bridges, roads, and enemy command centers to confuse the defense. Next came the Panzer divisions. Fast and powerful tanks that would punch through the weakest or most unexpected parts of the enemy's line. Behind them came the infantry, troops who would swiftly capture key positions before the enemy could recover. They didn't waste time eliminating every defensive line, they bypassed them. Their goal was to confuse, divide, and finish the fight before it truly began. In 1939, they used this strategy in Poland, and within weeks the entire country fell. In 1940, they used it in France. And within just 6 weeks, a powerful nation surrendered. While the world thought history would simply repeat itself, Nazi Germany launched an entirely new kind of war. A war without warning, fast and devastating. And before other nations could prepare, they were already consumed by lightning. At the heart of Nazi Germany's success was not just firepower, but the discipline of their soldiers and the brilliance of their system. While other armies moved slowly and relied on orders from above, the German army trained under a unique principle called Auftragstaktik, or mission-type tactics. In simple terms, it meant tactical freedom. Junior officers were given clear objectives but had the freedom to decide how to achieve them. There was no waiting for orders, no paralysis in the chain of command. If they saw an opportunity in battle, they acted quickly, confidently, and with full support from their superiors. This kind of discipline was not blind obedience, it was intelligent obedience, trained at every level. At the same time, Nazi Germany had already reached great heights in science and engineering. They were not afraid to experiment and certainly didn't wait for permission. With state support, many inventions emerged in the middle of the war. There were the panzer tanks, faster, easier to control, and more effective than most enemy vehicles. There were the Stuka dive bombers, which screamed as they descended, terrifying enemies before even hitting their targets. Through discipline and innovation, their army's movements became nearly perfect. They didn't just fight well, they fought faster, smarter, and more aggressively than expected. And in war, the combination of brains and firepower creates a monster that's hard to stop. But Nazi Germany's strength wasn't just in tanks or planes. It was rooted in an entire society engineered for war. From children to the elderly, from classrooms to factories, everyone was trained, indoctrinated, and forced to believe that the only purpose of their life was to serve the state. This was called the total war mentality, an ideology in which every part of society must serve the war effort. There were no civilians, everyone was part of the war machine. Education was used to shape young minds. Children were taught at a young age to love Hitler more than their parents. School lessons were no longer about logic or justice, but about the honor of the Aryan race and defending Germany to the death. The Hitler Youth and League of German Girls became military academies disguised as youth programs. Industry, with government backing, was entirely focused on producing weapons. Car factories turned into tank manufacturers. Textile mills made uniforms. Radio factories built bombs. Everything was driven by one idea: it was not enough to support the war. You had to give yourself to it. At the center of all this was propaganda. Led by Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi regime used every film, newspaper, poster, and radio to implant one message into the people's minds: Germany is great. Hitler is the savior. The enemies are evil. There was no room for doubt. Propaganda wasn't just for persuasion, it was a weapon of control. The fifth and final reason on my list for Germany's power during the Second World War was their early and aggressive use of advanced technology. While other nations were slow to embrace modern tech, Nazi Germany charged forward. They didn't wait for approval and weren't afraid of risk. To them, science wasn't an experiment, it was a weapon. As early as the 1930s, Hitler's government gave scientists and engineers nearly unlimited funding, as long as their inventions could aid the war. Under this support, technologies far ahead of their time emerged. There was the Messerschmitt Me 262, the first jet fighter in history. It was so fast that Allied aircraft could hardly keep up. Though deployed late in the war, it proved how far ahead the Nazis were in aviation. There was the V-1 flying bomb, the first cruise missile, and the terrifying V-2 rocket, the first ballistic missile that could strike from far away. From suborbital heights, it dropped to Earth without warning. London was shaken by explosions with no sound of planes approaching. This was a new face of war, you no longer needed a pilot to kill. They also used advanced communication systems like the Enigma machine, which was nearly impossible to crack. They experimented with chemical weapons, radar countermeasures, and even night vision technology, things that, at the time, seemed like science fiction. All of this came first. The world wasn't ready, but Nazi Germany had been ready for a long time. Their technology was the product of funding, discipline, and an ideology willing to sacrifice anything, even morality, for victory. These are just some of Germany's so-called wonder weapons. And they were developing even more. At first, it seemed like nothing could stop Nazi Germany. Everyone feared their speed, discipline, and technology. But behind that power was a fatal flaw. As their empire grew, their greatest enemy began to form: their own greed. Nazi Germany made the same mistake that had brought down many great empires before: they spread themselves too thin. By invading too many countries at once, they lost focus. In their assault on the Soviet Union, they were defeated not just by bullets, but by winter. By declaring war on the United States, they opened the door to a giant enemy they could not match in production or endurance. Within their own borders, morale collapsed, supplies ran dry, and the entire system that once terrified the world began to crumble. But above all, the foundation of their empire was built on fear, lies, and hatred. And a system built on those values, no matter how impressive it looks, will always fall. History is not just a story of victories. It is also filled with warnings. And the story of Nazi Germany is a powerful reminder: any power built on terror will one day return as destruction. If you believe stories like this matter, and if you think we must study the past to avoid repeating its mistakes, then subscribe now. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories, we learn from them.